I'm Brandon Scroggins, pastor here at Reformation Baptist Church, and I am excited to unleash to you the February Hymn, Creed, and Verse of the Month. We typically try to use the Hymn of the Month to learn new hymns that we've not yet learned before as a church, and the hymn for February is a rally cry. It's an urgent call. It's a call to action, and the hymn is entitled, Rise Up, O Men of God. Hymn number 339 in the Hymns of Grace hymnal. This hymn takes us back to 1911. Psalm 94:16 says, "Who will rise up for me against evildoers? Who will stand up for me against the workers of iniquity?" Robert Morgan helps us to understand the background to this hymn. He says that it was written somewhere on Lake Michigan on a steamship heading towards Chicago. Its author was a man by the name of William Merrill, who was nearing the end of his pastorate in Chicago before moving east to assume the leadership of New York's famous brick church. Merrill had come to Christ when he was only 11 years old. As a young man, he attended Rutgers College and Union Theological Seminary, and he was ordained into the Presbyterian ministry in 1819, pastoring churches in Philadelphia and then in Chicago. In 1911, he became pastor of Brick Presbyterian Church, and he remained there until his retirement in 1938. He wrote 10 books and several hymns, the best of which was the hymn, Rise Up, O Men of God. He had once explained how this hymn was written. While he was pastoring in Chicago, he was associated with a Presbyterian publication known as The Continent. Its editor was one named Nolan R. Best. And Nolan approached William and suggested the need for a strong hymn that would challenge and call forth men to rise up for Christ, especially in light of movements in the Presbyterian church at the time. Merrill read an article by Gerald Stanley Lee entitled The Church of Strong Men. He writes, I was on one of the Lake Michigan steamers going back to Chicago for a Sunday at my own church. Merrill writes, when suddenly this hymn came up, almost without conscious thought or effort. It first appeared in The Continent on February 16, 1911, and then the next year was published in the Pilgrim Hymnal. William Merrill was also a part of organizations promoting peace that seemed to be fruitful for quite some time, but then would fall apart at the beginning of the First World War. However, what would not fall apart would be the enduring legacy of this hymn, Rise Up, O Men of God. Have done with lesser things. Give heart and soul and mind and strength to serve the King of Kings. Rise up, O men of God, His kingdom tarries long. Bring in the day of brotherhood and end the night of wrong. Rise up, O men of God, the church for you doth wait. Her strength unequal to her task, rise up and make her great. Lift high the cross of Christ, tread where His feet have trod. As brothers of the Son of Man, rise up, O men of God. This is the time. This is the call for the men of God to arise and to take their post and to serve faithfully, executing the mission that God has given us in our families, our home, and in our churches and our community. As we do, our creed for February will be what is not often known as a creed, but it's something that every person should look back to often, should understand correctly, and should memorize as soon as possible. We're going to focus on the 10 Commandments. The Reformers really instilled the fact that every child, every believer ought first to memorize the Lord's Prayer, the Apostles' Creed, and the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments, God's law, has three purposes. They serve as a curb. The law of God restrains sin in all. The law of God also leads sinners to Christ. It acts as a tutor. And the law gives Christians a rule for godly living. It serves as a guide. The 1689 London Baptist Confession, chapter 19, paragraph 6 says, true believers are not under the law as a covenant of works, to be justified or condemned by it. Yet it is very useful to them and to others as a rule of life that informs them of the will of God and their duty. It directs and obligates them to live according to its precepts. It also exposes the sinful corruptions of their natures, hearts, and lives. As they examine themselves in light of the law, they come to further conviction of, humiliation for, and hatred of sin, along with a clearer view of their need for Christ and the perfection of His obedience. The law is also useful to the regenerate to restrain their corruptions because it forbids sin. The punishment threatened by the law shows them what even their sins deserve and what troubles they may expect in this life due to their sin, even though they are freed from the curse and undiminished severity of it. The promises of the law likewise show them God's approval of obedience and the blessings they may expect when they keep it, even though these blessings are not owed to them by the law as a covenant of works. If people do good and refrain from evil because the law encourages good and discourages evil, that does not indicate that they are under the law and not under grace. And then the confession clarifies in paragraph 7 of chapter 19, these uses of the law are not contrary to the graces of the gospel, but are in sweet harmony with it. For the Spirit of Christ subdues and enables the human will to do freely and cheerfully what the will of God as revealed in the law requires. So as it pertains to God's law, we're thinking more narrowly and specifically of the 10 commandments from Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5. We'll summarize them this way. Number 1, you shall have no other gods before me. Number 2, you shall not make for yourself any carved image. Number 3, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Number 4, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Number 5, honor your father and mother. 6, you shall not murder. 7, you shall not commit adultery. 8, you shall not steal. 9, you shall not bear false witness. 10, you shall not covet. The old catechisms indicate that the negative of the commandment, don't do this, also implies and indicates a positive, that you should do the very opposite. Rather than coveting, be content. Rather than lying, tell the truth. We'll learn the 10 commandments and confess them in public worship, confessing our breaking of them, confessing Christ's keeping of them, confessing Christ's forgiveness of us by keeping the law, and then looking to them as a guide for godliness in our own lives. And as we do, our verse for February will be a continuation of February as we walk through the book of 2 Corinthians on Sunday morning. In January, we learn 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 3. And then in February, we'll learn verse 4. And then in March, we'll complete the trio of months and round it out with verse 5. It's a section on the comfort of God. 2 Corinthians 1:4 is our memory verse for February, and it reads this way: who comforts us in all our affliction, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. It's a promise that no sorrow is wasted under the sovereign hand of God and when submitted to the cross of Calvary. And so God gives us comfort in our afflictions so that we then would be agents of comfort into the lives of others who then too need the grace of God that we have experienced in our own lives and can testify to, and that it can point, and we can point others to. So we'll look at the comfort of Christ, we'll look at the law of God, and we'll call men and all to rise up as we sing. God bless you. I hope that these tools are helpful as we calibrate our hearts together in our family worship and in our corporate worship.